Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story, this is the place for you.
Every episode, we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Ooh, yeah, this one is a classic.
It is. It's one of those books that I think everybody should read at some point in their lives.
And reread.
And reread, yeah, absolutely. But, it's more than just a memoir, right? It really gets into the heart of psychology and resilience.
That's what's so amazing is that Frankl, he takes this horrific experience of being in Nazi concentration camps and finds these profound insights about finding purpose in the face of unimaginable suffering.
Yeah, you can't really imagine anything worse, can you?
It's hard to even fathom.
Yeah, and what makes it even more fascinating to me is that he's going into this as a neurologist and psychiatrist, right? So he already has this background in understanding the human mind, and then he goes through this incredibly dehumanizing experience.
Yeah, his observations weren't just theoretical. They were born in the crucible of, human suffering.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, what makes Man's Search for Meaning so powerful, right? We're not just reading about suffering.
We're seeing it through the eyes of someone who's living through it.
Exactly, and then taking those experiences and developing this whole new school of psychotherapy, logotherapy.
So in this deep dive, I think it'll be interesting for us to explore those key insights that he had and how those translate into this idea of logotherapy. And then I'm really interested in how that connects to us, in the modern day.
Right, because his message of resilience and meaning-making, it's something that I think is so relevant to everyone, no matter what kind of challenges you're facing.
And I think that's why it's resonated with so many people for so long.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning, shall we?
Let's dive in.
So Frankl really doesn't shy away from describing just how brutal the camps were.
No, he's very frank about the dehumanization, the constant threat of death, the way everything was just stripped away that makes us human.
Yeah, and he even talks about having to hide his scientific manuscript, which represented his old life, because he realized that even clinging to that could be dangerous.
It makes you think about when you're in survival mode.
Everything changes.
Everything changes. Yeah, your values completely shift.
Yeah, and he talks about being reduced to a number 119,104.
It's hard to imagine not even being called by your name.
Right, just completely stripped of your identity.
It's just your number.
Yeah, and yet in the midst of all of this despair, he started observing how his fellow prisoners coped, how they found these little slivers of hope to hold on to.
Yeah, and he talks about this term, the Muslim.
What did that mean?
That was the term they used for prisoners who had just given up hope they'd lost the will to live.
Oh, man.
And it's through these observations that Frankl starts to understand the importance of meaning, even in these just dire circumstances.
So even though they were surrounded by death and suffering, there were still things that they could find meaning in.
Yeah, and, he talks about something as simple as shaving every day, to appear fit for work.
Right, so you don't get sent to the gas chamber.
Exactly. It became an act of defiance, a way of holding on to life.
Wow. Yeah, it wasn't about just hygiene. It was about something much deeper.
Right, and he also talks about how dangerous it was to even discuss food.
I remember that, yeah. Because even thinking about food when you're starving could be so agonizing.
Yeah, and he talks about how even fleeting moments of humor could be a way to connect and find some relief.
And then, of course, there's the power of love, right?
Yeah.
Even though Frankl didn't know if his wife was alive, he found solace in remembering her.
Yeah, he has this beautiful quote where he says, "Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self."
It's so profound how love can transcend even the most brutal circumstances.
I think it's one of the things that kept a lot of prisoners going, that connection to someone outside of the camps.
And that reminds me of that other really powerful moment where Frankl describes a bird alighting near him during a really grueling workday.
Oh, yeah, that's such a vivid image.
It's like in the midst of all this despair, he sees this bird and he experiences this flicker of beauty, this moment of hope.
He describes it as hearing a victorious yes inside himself, an affirmation of life, even in the face of death.
Wow. So it's like those little moments of connection, those glimmers of hope that can really help to maintain that will to live.
Yeah, and that leads to one of Frankl's most profound insights, in my opinion, which is that Even in the most horrific circumstances, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude.
So it's not just about our external circumstances, it's about our internal state.
Exactly. It's about what we focus on, how we choose to respond.
And he gives that example of choosing to stay with his parents, even though he had an American visa.
Well, right, because of a sense of responsibility to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though it might have meant a better chance of survival for himself, he felt this obligation to stay with his family.
It's such a powerful example of how our choices define us, even in situations where it seems like we have no choice at all.
Yeah. And then there's the story of Dr. J.
This is one that always stuck with me.
Yeah, it's disturbing because he starts out as this seemingly decent man, but then in the camp environment, he becomes brutal.
It's a reminder that even good people are capable of terrible things under extreme pressure.
Yeah, it makes you question the nature of good and evil, Ray.
Yeah, because Frankl observes that even in the depths of depravity, there are individuals who choose to act with humanity and kindness.
Right. He talks about those two races of men.
The decent and the indecent.
Yeah, and he gives that really stark contrast between the SS commander who buys medicine for the prisoners and the prisoner who becomes a cruel camp warden.
Showing that this divide exists within all groups.
Right. It's not about your background or your social status. It's about the choices that you make.
It really challenges us to look beyond labels and recognize that good and evil are choices, not inherent qualities.
So we've talked about the horrors of the camps, the struggle for survival, these glimmers of hope that Frankl observed. But what about liberation?
That's what I want to know. What happened when the day finally came?
Well, Frankl describes the reaction to liberation as being very muted, almost like they couldn't believe it was real.
Right.
Yeah, he talks about the difficulty of readjusting to a world that felt alien.
It's like they had been living in this nightmare for so long that stepping back into reality was almost a shock to the system.
Exactly. And it makes you realize that freedom after such prolonged trauma isn't just a simple swish that flips.
There's a process of healing that needs to happen.
Yeah, he describes his own experience as this gradual regaining of his humanity, step by step.
Like, what were some of those steps?
Where he talks about insatiable hunger,
Yeah, I can imagine.
the compulsion to talk, the gradual return of emotions.
Wow. So it's like he had to relearn how to be human again.
Exactly. And then there's this really beautiful moment where he describes kneeling in a field, just overwhelmed with gratitude. And he says, I called to the Lord from my narrow prison, and he answered me in the freedom of space.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it speaks to this profound sense of spiritual renewal, a reconnection with the world.
And a sense of purpose.
Right. But even with this newfound freedom, there were still challenges. He talks about the anger and bitterness that some prisoners felt the desire for revenge.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Right. He even tells this disturbing anecdote about a prisoner who wanted to stain his hand with blood.
Oh, wow.
It shows how trauma can lead to this perpetuation of violence.
So how do we break that cycle? How do we move from vengeance to healing and forgiveness?
That's the question, right?
Huh?
And it's not just a question for individuals, it's for societies as a whole. How do we heal from collective trauma?
It's a question that's still relevant today, unfortunately.
Yeah. Frankl's experiences in the camps, they force us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, but they also show the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
And his observations about finding meaning even in suffering, they really lay the groundwork for his development of logotherapy, which is what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, that's where things get even more interesting. And before we move on, I'm curious, what has resonated with you most powerfully so far in Frankl's account?
It's hard to choose. There's so much, but I think for me, it's that idea that even in the most horrific circumstances, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude. It's a powerful message of hope.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we're not just victims of circumstance, but active participants in creating our own lives, even in the midst of suffering.
It's really amazing how Frankl doesn't just, focus on the suffering. He actually uses it to create this framework for understanding our search for meaning. And that's where logotherapy comes in.
Yeah, I mean, he really flips the script on traditional psychological models, doesn't he?
He does.
Instead of saying we're just driven by pleasure or a will to power, he says our primary drive is this need to find meaning.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful shift in perspective because it suggests that meaning isn't something that's just a byproduct of, satisfying our basic needs or achieving success. It's actually like a fundamental human need.
And he even says in the book, man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life, and not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must be individually and personally discovered and acted upon.
Yeah, that's such a great quote. It really sums up the essence of logotherapy, which, by the way, literally translates to therapy through meaning.
I love that. So when we can't find that meaning or our search for meaning is blocked, what happens?
Well, Frankl calls this existential frustration.
Existential frustration.
Yeah, and he suggests that it can lead to these things called neugenic neuroses.
Neugenic neuroses.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but it's
Yeah.
basically saying that these aren't like your typical neuroses that, are stemming from repressed memories or, childhood trauma. This is something different.
So it's not like Freud was talking about.
Not exactly. It's not about these unconscious conflicts. It's about this lack of meaning in life, this feeling that nothing really matters.
Well, so it's like an existential crisis.
Yeah, exactly. It's that feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness that can really take hold of you.
So how do we combat that?
Well, logotherapy provides us with a roadmap of 3 main avenues for finding meaning.
3 avenues. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first one is creating a work or doing a deed.
Okay, so like what kind of things would fall into that category?
It could be anything, really, from pursuing your artistic passions to volunteering your time to raising a family.
Okay, so it's about making a contribution to the world.
Exactly. It's about leaving your mark, doing something that has an impact beyond yourself.
I love that. And what's the second avenue?
The second avenue is experiencing something or encountering someone.
So like having meaningful experiences or relationships,
Yeah, and Frankl puts a big emphasis on love here.
which makes sense given how much his wife meant to him.
Exactly. He sees love as a primary phenomenon, not just a sublimation of, sexual drives like Freud suggested.
So it's about connecting with something greater than yourself.
Right. And then the third avenue, which I think might be the most challenging, is finding meaning through the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering.
Oh, wow. That's deep. So he's not saying that we should seek out suffering, but that even in the face of pain, we can find meaning.
Exactly. And I think this is where his experience in the camps becomes so powerful because he's speaking from a place of real lived experience.
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about.
He's not just theorizing about this. He's lived through it. And he's saying that suffering itself can be a source of meaning.
I remember he tells that story about the elderly doctor who's grieving the loss of his wife.
Oh, yeah. And how Frankl helped him to reframe his perspective.
Right. He didn't try to dismiss the doctor's pain, but he helped him to see it in a different light.
He pointed out that by dying first, the doctor's wife was spared the pain of losing him.
Wow. So it's about finding meaning in sacrifice.
Yeah, and it's also about accepting the things we can't change and focusing on what we can control, which is our attitude, our response.
That's so powerful. And then Frankl takes it even further, right? He introduces this concept of super meaning.
Yeah, this is where he gets really philosophical.
He's basically saying that there might be a larger purpose at play, even if our limited human minds can't fully grasp it.
Right. It's like we don't need to have all the answers. We just need to trust that there's something more.
It's about embracing the mystery.
Exactly. And I think that's a really comforting thought, especially when we're going through difficult times.
It's like even when things seem meaningless, there's still a bigger picture that we're a part of.
And Frankl also talks about the importance of taking responsibility for our lives.
Oh, right. He has that famous quote, live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now.
It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically saying that we need to wake up and realize that our choices matter.
That every decision we make, every action we take shapes who we are.
And it creates ripples in the world around us.
Wow, it's like he's calling us to live more intentionally.
Exactly. And then there's this idea of tragic optimism.
Tragic optimism. That sounds like an oxymoron.
It kind of is, but it's basically about finding a way to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, the good and the bad.
So it's not about pretending that everything's fine.
No, it's about acknowledging the suffering, the guilt, even death, but still finding a way to find meaning and purpose.
And Frankl breaks this down into 3 core tenets, right?
He does first, turning suffering into achievement. Second, finding opportunity for change, even in the face of guilt. And finally, viewing our temporary existence as an incentive for action.
Wow, that's a powerful framework for living.
It is. It's about finding a way to make every moment count.
And Frankl also challenges this idea of pandeterminism.
Right, the idea that we're completely shaped by our biology or environment.
He's basically saying that we have free will.
Yeah, that even in the most dehumanizing conditions like the camps, he saw people making choices that defined who they became.
So it's not just our genes or our upbringing that determine our fate.
Exactly. We have the power to choose our response to any situation.
That's incredibly empowering. So out of all of this, what part of tragic optimism resonates with you the most? It's amazing to me how Frankl's work was written, decades ago, and it still feels so relevant today.
It really does.
It's like he tapped into something universal about, the human experience.
Yeah, I think that's because the search for meaning, it's a fundamental human need. The challenges that Frankl faced in the camps, they were extreme.
Extreme, yeah.
But the questions he was grappling with, about purpose and suffering and resilience.
That's something we all deal with.
Yeah, we all face those in our own lives in different ways.
Like his experiences just distilled those questions down to their very essence.
And in a way, I guess he was forced to find those answers in the most, stark and unforgiving of circumstances.
Yeah, it doesn't get much worse than that.
No, it doesn't.
But then the insights that he gained, they offer us this roadmap for navigating our own struggles.
That's the beauty of it, right? It's like he went through the worst of the worst and came out the other side with this message of hope.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even in the midst of pain and loss, we still have this power, to choose hope.
And to create something beautiful and enduring.
That's the legacy of man's search for meaning, isn't it?
It is.
It's not just about surviving suffering.
It's about living a life of purpose.
Yeah, embracing the full, spectrum of human experience and finding meaning in it all.
I love that.
And, it's not just about individual meaning making either, right?
No, absolutely not. Frankl's ideas have these huge implications for society as a whole.
Well, yeah. His critique of pandeterminism, right? That we're just products of our biology or environment.
It's a really important point.
Yeah, it's a call to recognize, human agency, our capacity for choice and responsibility.
And, it's suggesting that we all have this role to play in shaping a more just and compassionate world.
Even in the face of, systems that might try to dehumanize us.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important message, especially in times like these, when it's easy to feel overwhelmed by forces beyond our control.
Totally, yeah.
It's like a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders.
Right. We can actually make a difference.
Exactly.
One thing that really stood out to me was Frankl's idea of a rehumanization of psychotherapy.
Oh, yeah. He had some pretty strong opinions about that.
Well, he felt like a lot of approaches to psychology were too focused on, reducing people to their instincts or their past traumas.
Yeah, he felt like they were neglecting our capacity for meaning-making and self-transcendence.
Right. And so logotherapy is kind of like a counterpoint to that.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're more than just the sum of our parts.
Like there's a spiritual dimension to our existence that needs to be acknowledged.
Absolutely, and nurtured.
Right. And that's what logotherapy really tries to do.
It does. It provides tools and techniques to help people connect with that deeper sense of purpose and meaning.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Exploring some really, incredibly powerful ideas from man's search for meaning.
It's a dense book.
It is, yeah. If you had to, distill Frankl's message down to its essence, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's this. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, we have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning, and to live a life of purpose.
That's powerful.
And, Frankl's story and his development of logotherapy, they offer this powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
And that enduring search for meaning that really connects us all.
Is what makes us human.
Yeah, it's a message that's both challenging and hopeful, right?
Absolutely.
Challenging because it asks us to step up and take responsibility for our lives.
But hopeful because it reminds us that even in the darkest of places,
we can find light, we can find meaning, we can choose to live with purpose.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's a book that I think will stay with you long after you finish reading it, and it offers profound insights for anyone navigating the, complexities of human existence.
It's definitely a must-read.
It is. Until next time.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of BookerCast. We hope you enjoyed diving into it as much as we did. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this episode with your fellow book lovers. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next deep dive. Bye for now, and happy reading.